organization as an L&D leader, as well as with NIIT to deliver their training solutions for corporates. She has contributed to all phases of an evolving learning organization, which includes setting up an L&D function, global program delivery for 70,000 odd workforces, to championing technology-enabled learning for large MNCs. She has been instrumental in transitioning learning to virtual platforms for 45,000 plus employees at lightning pace during the unprecedented event of pandemic for Infosys BPM. With this, please welcome Ms. Uma with a huge round of applause.
Good evening, everyone. In fact, high performance culture, when this is about 2 years back, when somebody said it's all about high performance culture, we'll have to drive high performance culture in the organization. This very much sounds like those corporate buzzword, right? I mean, you have many of these corporate buzzwords, honestly. Nothing wrong with it. It just brings you brings a sense of community, togetherness. When you hear this corporate buzzwords, much like the fashion world, we too have some of these fads. And of course, there are plenty to quote. And for me, this was one of those jargon, so to say, once upon a time. Until one day, one of our business leaders said, how do we really drive this kind of performance culture within the organization? And that got us thinking. And what I'll probably share would be some of the stuff that we have been doing within the organization, and also, of course, some of my own thoughts, point of view in terms of how we can really do this. What is important is the fact that while it sounds like a loaded three-letter word, high performance culture, there is so much of emotional significance that goes behind it, yeah? And I want to bring some of those elements here, which we have tried to probably unearth within the organization and see what we can do to really bring that into life. And also, I'm more than happy to hear some thoughts from you also as we move, if we have the time. I know we have just got about 20 minutes to do this. So as I said, I mean, the corporate buzzwords, in fact, on a lighter note, about 10 years back, the word, you would only hear about employee engagement, right? Employee engagement, employee development. Suddenly we started calling it talent development, talent engagement. And I often used to wonder, what is this talent? I mean, talent is something for me, somebody who is something that comes to someone very naturally, someone who is very good at. I would call 𝗂𝗏 Rahman a talented, musician, or probably Dhoni a talented, sportsman. But then we started calling anybody and everybody talent, right? And somewhere, some of these jargons that we often have, when it gets overused, it becomes more cliche, and then the real essence of that goes down. So I want to probably step back and probably spend a little time on what we really mean by performance culture, and then spend the next 5 minutes in terms of how do we really want to do this. So put simply, very simply put, the definition is very simple. What is a high performance culture? Any culture which can enable and get the best out of our people is what a high performance culture is all about. Yeah, I'm sure most of you would agree with me on that. And high performing teams are the ones who probably go behind a goal, a single goal, and they all come together and deliver their best, not deliver their best once, twice, but deliver consistently. And that's where we really start looking at what a high-performing team or a high-performing culture is, so to say. Having said that, what we also realized is we can't say this is the culture we want for the organization today. Let's roll out a communication plan, launch plan, and then there are mailers floating around. This is what the culture should be like. I mean, that will not work if we have to really look at how we can drive results, which comes back to the fact that any organization today, big or small, has their own strategy more about what should we do in the next year, the next 12 months, where are we going, where are we heading. I'm sure all of us, in each of our organizations have that strategy. That's one piece. Obviously that's one. And each one of us in our own organization have our own culture as well. And culture is all about how you and I interact, how you and I think, and how you and I work together. It's more, the culture is more about the DNA of the organization. You and I start building that culture. The way we interact is how we define culture. And obviously, so when this culture is can be good culture or bad culture, like cholesterol, it can be good or bad. And as long as things go well and we are happy, we'll say, oh, it's a great culture. And when things don't work well for us, we say, no, the culture is not all that good. So there is one piece called culture, there is one piece called strategy, but it is so important for any organization to succeed, to really drive performance. Culture has to be aligned to strategy. Yeah? Just to quote an example, making it a little more realistic, so to say, 5 years back, when our service line, the BPO service line of Infosys was all about just driving transactions, making sure that you finish X number of transactions every year, or probably answer 1,000 calls with some call center agents, and making sure it's all about efficiency, yeah, all about efficiency, quality. Then the culture that we had was probably, how could we be more process-driven, quality-driven, more of hierarchy and process, just to ensure that the client on the other side doesn't suffer. How do we really bring that rigor in the day-to-day process? Because it is all about transactions. 2 years back, when it all turned around, digitization, automation, providing analytical insights, obviously the kind of culture we had to bring in was give our employees more freedom and space to think, look at opportunities, and being able to provide those insights to our customers, take in some risk, and bring in some innovation and stuff like that. So obviously that requires a very different culture. So one of the things that we did was, how do we really want to look at the organization going forward? What kind of culture do we need? And to that extent, we said, let's roll out a culture survey, figure out what do our employees think, and what kind of culture do we need to address our strategy, and hence marry both of that. Yeah, so which is where I'm coming. Culture has to be aligned to strategy if we have to really perform and do well. Now, having said that, of course, for me, culture is more like an X factor. Your strategy, tools, systems, anybody and everybody can copy. But the culture is more about how you and I work and how we approach strategy. That is the X factor of any organization, and hence that plays a very important role. And if only if both of these come together, can we really drive performance. Having said that, there is this, probably before COVID, it's all about, well, let's just put some goals together. The goals have to be smart. Let's see how do we really drive performance. And often we as managers, leaders, HR have this ability, have this, we have this conversation, right? Guys, you will have to, take on more, stretch yourself, resilient, bounce back. These are the common terms that we hear in the organization whenever you do a performance review or have a conversation with your manager. Increasingly, I think there are enough and more studies to say that simply pushing people is not really going to drive performance. And I'm sure many of you, and we have heard a lot of it in the morning, how will we really get wellness into the organization. And if you have to really drive performance, wellness and performance will have to coexist. Yeah. And when I say wellness, it is not about the 4-day week or Friday no emails. What we are referring to here is more about creating that psychological safety. I feel safe being in this organization. I'm welcomed. I'm part of this organization. And unless and until that happens, the employee is not really going to be giving his 100%. So first and foremost, we realized that's the key thing that we have to ensure. How do we really build that psychological safety? The second is bring your authentic self to work. Of course, I'm sure many of you hear that, the authentic leadership and stuff like that. How do I really, not put on two different masks? One is the mask that you and I see here. Probably if you see me on Facebook, it would be a very different Uma, I'm sure. We want to post the most exotic holidays, some of the best times that we have with a partner. But is that our true self? Not really. So people have increasingly, succumbed to the fact that we just need to be our real self, and people will have to accept us as it is. It's only then that I can feel part of a larger group. So how do I really bring my authentic self, and can the company accept me the way I am, is the second big important aspect. Last but not the least is it just my goals and my outcome, or is the work itself? Yeah. And people today call that purpose. Do I know what is the real purpose of doing this? How is my work related to the larger organization or the end customer? That is one aspect. but do I really enjoy doing what I'm doing? Yeah. If I were to take the example of a mountaineer, yeah, who has gone at the, reached the peak, and if you were to read any of these books these mountaineers have written, it's never about those happy moments. It's always about those frost bites, the rough terrain, the bitter cold, and how they had to navigate themselves, no food, and all of that. And then that's what their books are all about. So it's not so much about that having reached the summit or the end destination, but the real journey that they really enjoy. That's what they do. I mean, imagine a mountaineer going up and just having a cakewalk there, and I'm sure he will say, I mean, why did I spend this money and come here all the way? I might as well gone to a beach with a mojito and probably had a better time. So somewhere it's so important for us to also bring in the element of journey along with the outcomes. Yeah, so it's not so much about what you achieve at the end of the day, but how have you achieved also, what is the effort that has gone in. To that extent, we had a very strategic team in the organization, yeah, to bring all of these elements, saying for almost 2 years, we said anything and everything that you do must have the right balance between head and heart, yeah. So we brought in that element of empathy, conversations, growth mindset, and all of that in our development programs, in our coaching conversations. Because on the other side, there was also this aspect of the head, which is all about, how do you really drive growth, and how do you really make sure that you meet your client expectations? How do you really balance that? So to that extent, we spent a significant amount of time talking about the head and heart quotient within the organization. So that's that employee wellness, psychological safety, inclusivity is a second big thing that is important to drive performance. Yeah, so that's what we thought we should do before we really do anything. The next thing is obviously, what can we as HR do in the interest of really building that culture? Obviously, every function within the organization has a role to play. While the organization had a strategic theme around head and heart and all of that, we said, what is it that we as HR should be doing? So one of the first things that we did was, of course, no brainer, growth is not just promotion, because after a level, I can't be asking for a promotion. There's only so much that we can do to promote people. So we started defining growth in very different terms. And our colleague mentioned a few minutes before, skills became the new currency for us. Yeah, for every job level, for every grade, we mapped it to a couple of skills. Yeah, and then we started identifying them, and the designations was no more about the manager, team lead, and stuff like that. We had those designations based on skills. So they had something called a skill identity. We call that a skill tag, which they could flaunt on their LinkedIn, within the organization, and really calling them as specialists in some place, in some form, which also gave them a larger opportunity to move across the organization. Yeah, I have the skill, hence I can probably move into another project, see how I can probably explore my skills in another engagement, so on and so forth. To that extent, there were skill tag incentives attached to it as well. So that's how we started defining growth within the organization. Somewhere growth was no more about the incremental money or the promotion. The second was we made sure that as part of all our leadership programs, we had leaders coming up and talking about some of their failure stories. Yeah, that became extremely important. Can I have water, please? Thank you. The vulnerability-based trust became extremely important. Yeah, I have not done well. I don't know this. I did fail in this engagement. I did fail in this client conversation. And they had to come and address almost about 3,000 of the managers saying, this is where I failed. Yeah, so when they became vulnerable, somewhere the trust quotient increases. Yeah, so that's also another area where we made a deliberate attempt to see how we could really help our leaders, not just boast about their performance, but also talk about some of their failure stories. The third, which you would agree, the managers are amplifiers, because they are sandwiched between the leadership on one side and then the team members on the other side. So how do we really invest in our managers so that they are in a position to ensure that performance does not fall, go down. So in terms of that, while every organization does this high potential leadership program, let's get the best of the folks on a leadership program. I mean, we said these best of the folks anyway know what to do. Yeah, and they will find their way within the organization. Why are we investing in them? We rather look at the generic population who have met expectations and can we see what can we do about them. So that's more about how do we really invest more and more in our managers. The last but not the least is about really bringing about that performance differentiation. When I say performance differentiation, I don't know, many of you would have heard bell curve is no more valid. Why should we have a bell curve? This is my view. I'm not too sure. Can we really do away with something called a bell curve? If not a bell curve, there has to be some curve which helps us differentiate the best and the good. Yeah. Otherwise, how do you really recognize the real good ones? There has to be some level of differentiation. It may not be bell curve. It could be something else. Organizations that have moved away from bell curve still have the differentiation called out in some form. Yeah. They do put those people on a potential performance talent map and put the best performers in one side of the graph, the rest here. So I do get to see where do I stand within the organization. So the bell curve concept is good to eliminate, but we still have to differentiate the good and the bad. And then there was enough and more that we need to make sure that we address that bit. And I don't know how many are here L&D professionals. If you are here, probably you will relate to this. Let's also understand the fact that the world of the work has changed. It's more about those gig workers that we all talk about. The workspace has changed. We have moved from our workstation from office to home. The definition of work has changed. It is no more about a job description. It's about how can I just learn 2-3 skills, work in Infosys in the morning, probably, take up some other freelancing sometime late evening, pick up some job there, or probably my hobby is also painting, let me do something there. So people are looking at how they can really become more agile in the way they earn money, the way they contribute to the organization. So when the definition of work, workforce, workspace has all changed, there is a big need for even the education system to change. Yeah, we can no more say we will have to have only 4-year degree graduates can be hired. I mean, that doesn't work anymore. We'll have to see how we can just pick up people who have the necessary skills and hire them in the organization. Is it more about education? Is it more about experience? Or is it more about skills? Increasingly, we realize that it is more about skills, and we will have to look at skills as a criteria when we hire people. So that was one big, and that translates to even the learning function. Yeah, you can almost say you have to go through my 5-week course on any of the technology. Guys, I need some quick tips on how should I just get around with this project. Can you tell me what to do? So those micro-size learning becomes very important. That's where the Coursera and the others are now leading the show. So it's extremely important for the education system to see how they can become the Courseras of the world before Coursera becomes a Harvard or Stanford. Yeah, so that's another important piece. As L&D professionals, what are we doing to bring this agile learning? How do we help people look at problem finding and less of problem solving? Do we really hire for expertise or the learnability quotient? Those were the big next things that we also looked at, and today we have quite a lot of stuff around these, really providing micro nuggets courses around this. Last but not the least, while we do performance reviews, typically what happens is more of a tick in the box. It's more of a compliance issue. We have to complete the performance appraisal, but really not building that accountability. Yeah, the accountability in terms of, I don't think we have done enough on this bit. Do I have your commitment here? Do I have your commitment to complete this project on time? And how many times do we really challenge our folks or ask these questions? Increasingly important for us to move from the so-called complaints to commitment. The second important one, ask yourself, do you provide them enough feedback or are you enabling them for low performance? As managers, as individuals, do we do that enough? And these are some of the things that we consciously talk, push just before any appraisal cycle. Last but not the least, talk about the consequences. When there are consequences, there are two kinds of consequences. If you don't do this, I will not be able to take a decision. That's the logical consequence. As opposed to if you don't do this, you're going to let the rest of the team down. There's an emotional consequence. Increasingly, people relate more to the emotional consequence rather than logical consequence. None of us say, you know, I'm going to complete this work in the next 2-3 days so that I can go on, you know, so that the organization benefits from it. What do we say? We say, I'm going to get this going because I have to go spend my vacation peacefully. So there's always an emotional angle attached to work. So increasingly, we will have to start talking more about this rather than talking about the organizational consequences. This is our next view on this. And I know. So that's in a nutshell, folks. Just had 15 minutes. I thought I should just summarize this quickly. Finally, it's all about their ability to, you know, see value in what they are doing and then, you know, literally figuring out how do we really drive performance. So engagement is the fundamental, if I may say, pillar if you have to really drive performance. So taking people along the journey makes sense. The rest of it in terms of SMART goals and so many things that we talk about is all okay. But the fundamental core principle is all about how much of inclusivity do we really bring in within the organization. So on that note, thank you. And any questions, more than happy to